But like you said, it's kind of, if you're not on Instagram or you just don't see it for whatever reason, you might also not realize the race is happening.
I don't know, Ben, how have you found it? Have you been able to follow it like in a way that's pleased you or helped you keep up to date with it from home?
Yeah, so I think in finale there were a few issues with the live timing, with it being a bit slow to update. But in Leogang that seemed to be fine. I was able to watch. They updated something in the format of how they display the results, which confused me for a little while, where it was they changed it to last finishes rather than the actual result at the top. So once I got my head around that, it was really good. In terms of like I think like there's kind of like live on the UCI MTB World Series Instagram page, there's like live clips from the stages, interviews going out as the day's going on, which I think's great. But like you said, it's kind of, if you're not on Instagram or you just don't see it for whatever reason, you might also not realize the race is happening.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of stories that could be told within enduro racing, which aren't. Like, I mean, I tuned into a pirate broadcast from the final stage in Leogang, and it looked like, there's big crashes from people, which it does make you realise that there's a lot of stuff that happens on these stages that we miss or don't really. When someone gets to the finish and says, "Oh, I had a massive crash," you don't quite realise what they mean until you actually see them.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it would be brilliant if we could have a few stages broadcast live, or I don't know. It's obviously it's a really difficult sport to cover, as it is over a full day and all over the place.
Yeah, it's not an easy one. I put a post up the other day asking about like the coverage and stuff, and a couple of people made the point that I can't remember how many years ago, but a few years ago we used to have like a live text feed that was there with the live timing feed on what was the Enduro World Series website, I think, at the time. And that was actually pretty useful because that helped tell a bit of the story and put some context around it. And if you're not like super geeky and want to follow all the timing, then it's a good way to look at that, and also to know like, oh, such and such crashed or such and such got a puncture. So yeah, I thought that it maybe bringing that back, I don't know how easy that is to do, but it's been done in the past, and that helps people follow that narrative. But yeah, I think you're right, Ben. It's like the story element is the piece there. So I've watched the highlights reels, and I think they're an improvement from, and when I say reel, I should say highlights YouTube video, like the 20-25 minute piece that Josh has been doing and doing a good job on. And I think they're an improvement on last year. I like the fact that last year they had the EDR and the EDR kind of mishmashed together in the format, and now it's like it covers the EDR first and then the e-bike series, so you can decide which piece you watch or whatever. It makes that a lot easier. But yeah, and there's some really good footage. There's some great drone footage in there, and there's some good clips from the stages. But I feel like by the time I'm sitting down watching that, I know the result. I kind of know roughly like what happened, how the weekend panned out, because I've looked and I've seen the timing and who won. So for me, it's about getting that insight and the stories. And there is a bit of that. There are some rider interviews, but I feel like, I don't know, James, I'd be keen to get your thoughts, but I feel personally that it would benefit from more chat with the riders in that 20-minute wrap-up than I'd rather that than over-riding footage, I think, because the rider footage is limited anyway. It's going to be by the nature of the event, but hearing what happened and what went on and hearing the riders' take on it is, for me, is the interesting part of the story.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think who are we to say like how they do their videos? But it's like, I think they're obviously trying to fit an entire race into a relatively short video, and then they're trying to get, and this happens to us when we're doing our books. Sometimes we try and get every rider in a, anyone who's done anything every round. We try and get them in every round. And then sometimes we end up with the sort of same photos all the time, or the same stories, or the same people. And I think they sometimes fall into that category. It's really hard to avoid that because every single stage you're like, oh, there's all this story and this one. And all this rider's first, this one's second, this one's third. We've got to show an image of them.
Yeah.
So they end up doing that, and then you really quickly run out of time or space.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, so I think sometimes, being brutal in that sense and getting the story from the riders afterwards could be really interesting. It's funny, just going back to the live text feed as well. It's funny, isn't it, that I think so many people talk about that and talked about that, and obviously followed it. It's such a simple thing, and it's kind of probably a really thankless task for whoever's running it, because you're just there sort of talking to yourself, putting these things out, and it's really hard to measure the success of that, because it's not like Instagram where you can put a video out of someone crashing probably and or breaking a bike, failing. It's not like you can put that out and get massive numbers on it, or sending it over the wall ride in at the league and going downhill or whatever. It's not like you can do that and get all these big numbers on it, so it's harder to report on that. So I think, trying to think about that live text feed, I think Kate Ball used to do that.
Okay.
And I might be wrong there, but I think it's like sitting there throughout an entire race putting updates on this thing, and then there's not really any interaction back from people. So I think it's an easy one for someone to come in and say, oh, we'll just shelve that because it's it's not getting us any numbers. But actually, when you speak to people, it's the thing that they remember and that they miss.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? We're like, because of the nature of the way some of this stuff is distributed, like we're almost driven in how the content is created to please those platforms. So we are seeing a lot of crash footage, and it's interesting to see like the important crashes, like, oh, someone's lost the lead because they had a crash on a stage or whatever. Like, that's relevant. But just seeing a crash reel, for me, as someone who wants the story of the event, I don't really want to watch that, but I understand why that pleases Instagram and does well, and therefore the numbers look good. So it's that balance, isn't it, between getting enough traction on the platforms versus telling the story and giving the fans what they need, which is super hard, I guess. I think, I certainly feel that battle with posting stuff on YouTube. I don't know how you guys feel, but you want to stay true to the sport and you want to cover the stories, but at some point, like, you have to make money and you have to have the numbers come through to be able to do it. So it's a tricky balance, huh?
Yeah, I think as long as it depends how extreme you go down the sort of cheesy or fail route in your sort of desperate quest for numbers, I think. And then trying to stay true to being a media company or an organizer or whatever, or whatever your role is, brand, and just staying focused on your sort of identity and role within the sport is important.
Yeah, definitely. But it feels like it's I would say a good step on from last year, and it feels like it's again an ever evolving, ever improving thing every week. Like, I think the coverage is clearly, it could always be better. It's a very hard thing to cover, like we said, but it feels like there's more thought and more graft going into it this year, and I personally really appreciate that as a fan.